So it's been the aha moments that make a really big difference. So again, I stress that aha moments may not be behavioral. It's not like you can do a graph of them, but my gosh, the aha moments are what changed my entire life, moment to moment to moment when I had them. So that's the way it is. At any rate, the first aha moment that I have listed is when I was working in the institutions about 1976. Some of the children would sometimes run away. And there was one little girl that ran away. I start crying. I apologize because this stuff is very moving for me. But there was one little girl who would run away, and she'd always go out on a bridge over the highway in North Carolina, over Highway 40, and would sit on the bridge and cry and call for her mother. And at the time, we used to just think it was sweet. When you're working in an institution, you don't realize, you don't see it from the point of view of the child. Somebody had to go get her and bring her back. And everybody just would snicker about it and say, yeah, that's Heidi. I'm using a fake name. Heidi is what Heidi does or whatever. And then years later, after other experiences, I looked back at that and realized the depth of that little girl's sadness, being separated from her parents and her mother and being put in an institutional environment. We just don't grasp the impact of that on a child's life. And it takes a lot of change in us, in ourselves, to be able to grasp what's happening to another person. And that was a very powerful moment for me.
Heidi. Heidi came to school every day with matching socks, matching bows in her hair, and matching little panties. And she had diapers on, but she had really cute panties over her diapers. And a little dab of perfume mom always put on her, and she smelled lovely. And when Heidi was 3, when she started in my class, she weighed 12 pounds. So she clearly was underweight and tiny, really, really tiny. And mom and dad adored her. There was never a question about how much they loved her. But I noticed whenever I told mom and dad about her making progress, they would change the subject. So one weekend, I agreed to babysit for the weekend. Heidi had done a couple of things over the weekend that I had never seen her do. And so when Carl and Bonnie came home, I'm telling them about it. And I'm so excited that Heidi had done these things. And right away, Bonnie changed the subject. And so I said, I don't get it. I know you love her unconditionally, but why do you change the subject when I talk about progress she's making? And Bonnie's eyes immediately filled with tears. And then she told me this story that had such an impact on me. Before Heidi was 3, when she was in the early intervention program, she went to a mom's group run by a school psychologist. And one week, the psychologist asked all the moms to go home and maybe engage their families to write up their dreams for their child and to bring them back to group and read them to the group. So Bonnie invites her parents over, her in-laws over. She serves the good china. She's a calligraphy. So she calligraphied what they come up with as a family. And it's beautiful. And so she reads it out loud, very proud. And after she finishes reading it, the psychologist says to her, you have to be more realistic because you have to listen to what the neurologist and the orthopedist said. Heidi's never going to do those things. And so the psychologist sent them back to rewrite her goals. She rewrote her goals. She didn't invite anybody over. She didn't serve the good china, and she didn't calligraphy it. And she wrote her revised goals that her heart wasn't into, and went back to mother's group and read them. And the psychologist's response was, well, these are closer to realistic, but they're still not totally realistic. And Bonnie said, I stopped going to mother's group. And it taught me such an important lesson. We have no right to take away the dreams of a family, regardless of how unrealistic they might be at this particular point.
This was back, almost 70 years ago, where institutions were expected to be self-supporting. And they had crops and cows and a bakery, and it was very typical at that time that these institutions would go to their various state legislators and say, we can do this cheap. So my dad was, having grown up with cows, my dad got hired as the dairyman at this big institution. My mother took a job as a secretary at the institution, but soon left to take a different job in a nearby town. But we lived on the grounds of this institution. So my brother, who was younger, and I mean, we ran around. There was a lot of acreage, a lot of interesting things, a lot of interesting people, including lots of kids our age. And, you know, our parents were both working. And so we went wherever we wanted to. Everybody knew us, and we were in and out of buildings and talking to anybody we wanted to, including a lot of residents with severe disabilities, what we now might call severe disabilities. And I was observant, and I could not understand why my brother and I were living with our parents in our little apartment on the grounds of that institution, and all of these other children were not allowed to live with their parents. Some of them didn't even know who their parents were. They had just been dropped off because their families died, or they got in trouble, or some girl got pregnant, or very odd reasons. And that was a foundational experience for my life. And that question, why do I get to live with my parents and the other kids don't get to live with their parents? That question has guided my life's work.
When Jay was first born, as I said, professionals said institutionalize him. And they began to do applied behavior analysis on him, not to make him any more competent, but to get data so they could make a publication. So the moment of impact began very early in his life. But the one that really frosted me was when the governor of North Carolina asked me to go to a state institution and to investigate something that was then called aversive therapy. So I went out to this state institution with 4 or 5 other members of this task force, and sitting at a table full of physicians and psychologists and social workers and educators. 2 of the psychologists began to talk about the Learning to Be Better box. Oh, said I, what is the Learning to Be Better box? Well, they said it's a way of helping us collect data and change people's behavior. I said, what do you mean by, what are data? Using the plural because I studied Latin for 4 years. Baseline data. Look, I grew up in New York. I was a fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers. I understand baseline meaning home to first base to second, third, and back again. So I was so ignorant, Susan. You cannot believe how ignorant I was. So first of all, I had to ask what's baseline data. And second, I said, well, what about this Learning to Be Better box? I'd like to see it. What does it do? I said, well, it teaches people to behave more appropriately. I said, fine. Let me see it. Oh, we're going to recess until you show up with the box. It might be in use. I'd say, I don't care whether it's in use. You go get that box. And if you don't, I will report to the governor that you have refused to comply with the reasonable request issued by the governor's agent. So recess. they go off and come back and back in a session again. There's a little wooden box, about 4 inches wide, 4 inches deep, 4 inches high. And at the top of it were 2 little brass nodules connected by a copper wire. And on the side of the box was a little switch. I said, what do you do with that? Well, when somebody's misbehaving, we turn on the switch, we chase him down, we lower his pants, raise his shirt, and apply it to his lower abdomen, and it gives him a little shock. And that teaches him, don't do that again. Well, I'm listening very carefully, and I'm becoming more and more disturbed. So I said, have you ever used it on yourself? Have you ever used it on yourself? And their answer was, no, it's for them. Well, I said, all right. So I took off my blazer. I rolled up the sleeve on my shirt. I turned on the box. I put it on my arm, and I jumped. I literally jumped out of my chair. I could not imagine having that done to my son. Harm was being done in the name of doing good. I got back to my office. I called my boss the next morning. I said, boss, I would like a half a day a week to begin researching the North Carolina law about disability. He said, take it. I lied. I didn't use half a day a week. I devoted my entire career to it.